Glad to see you all. Just give it a couple minutes since we're just at the hour. Make sure everyone's able to get in. Welcome, everyone. We're just waiting a minute or two to see if anyone else is going to join us before we get going. Hi, Marisol. Welcome.
Good morning.
It is very rainy here right now, and it is like 70 degrees, but by tonight it's going to be in the 40s.
70 degrees, good Lord.
Yeah, because normally it's, I'm in Tampa, Florida, so normally it's pretty hot, even in November. And now we're getting a cold front, I guess, because it's not going to get out of the 50s tomorrow. So it's like hot and humid and rainy out, but then by tonight it's going to be cold, almost freezing. So
welcome to my world.
Well, I'm from Massachusetts, so I'm used to the cold, but not in Tampa.
It's probably, I've forgotten how to use Fahrenheit now because we used to,
I know, yeah, I don't know how to translate it.
In the 40s today.
Yep. Yep.
Well,
welcome. It seems like we have a good group, so I'm going to start to share your content, Dr. Peets.
Right.
Glad to see everyone. Thank you all for being here. Wonderful to have you. And can you see that okay?
I can see that okay, yeah.
Great.
Do we need it bigger or should I leave it like that?
On my screen, it's full screen, so I'm not sure.
Right, okay. I'm still not completely convinced. I'm not completely comfortable with all this technology.
Vernak, is that full screen for you?
No.
Verna, does it look okay?
Yeah, I can see it very well from my end.
Okay, great.
Okay, yeah, I've got it full screen now.
Okay. All right, okay. Well, then I'll just welcome everyone and say that I'm pleased to see you all. Glad that you're here on this last day of November, and we will be going over qualitative research, which is something that I'm really grateful to Dr. Pates for reviewing because it was really more of a request from participants, and he's always very willing to teach about whatever you guys need assistance with. And I will be here ready to turn the screen as you go, or turn your PowerPoint as you go.
Okay, thank you very much, and welcome everybody. We don't have a paper to review today, so you can ask as many questions as you like during this because it is important. But also, once we've finished, if there's other things you want to talk about, then I'm happy to talk about them. I think qualitative research is something which is very important and is in terms of the history of research in addiction, is relatively new, in the sense that people have been researching on drugs and alcohol for at least 100 years, but trying to get stuff published in qualitative research, I remember trying to do it in the 90s, and it was quite hard. A lot of journals didn't take this sort of work. But I know for myself that when I did my doctorate, I did it partly using quantitative research, but also qualitative research. And it was frowned upon a bit because you shouldn't use mixed methods, and we'll discuss that. But it actually, the qualitative research provided such content to the work that I was doing that I'm a great fan of it. And I think one of the things is that if you're just doing a survey or a piece of research, when you're measuring something, you don't always hear what the participants are saying. It's well worth hearing in their voices, because you often hear different things than you would assume. Anyway, that's just a brief introduction. If we could have the first slide, Kerry. There we are. Qualitative research is once frowned upon and often difficult to publish, as it was not seen as scientifically rigorous. Many journals wouldn't publish it, and some still do not have the reviewers to referee it. And this is one of the problems, that if you submit a paper that is qualitative and the journal is not used to publishing much qualitative work, they may not have the reviewers to referee it, and they may be a little more difficult to get it through the reviewers. It shouldn't be, but it may be. It is much more acceptable now, and as I said earlier, it provides valuable insight into our subject. And I may talk a bit about my doctoral research on the way through, just to give you some illustrations. Next slide. Next slide, Kerry. Next slide.
I did. It might just be taking a moment on your end. I'm not sure.
Sorry.
That's okay. No worries.
If I'd done this properly, I'd have learned to do it myself, wouldn't I?
Is it there now?
No.
Oh, on my end, I've gone back and forth a couple times.
Right. What should I do? Should I?
Well, let's
Yeah,
see.
to me, I think it's already Dr. Bates.
I got half and half now.
I can stop sharing and do it again.
Yeah, could you?
That's one thing.
How's that?
I have a blank screen at the moment.
Yeah, I'm not sure what else we can do, because I believe it looks right on Verna and other folks' screen and on mine.
So should I try to open up mine?
Yeah, let's try to put up yours. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay.
And then, so pull up your PowerPoint on your computer.
Yeah, it's there now.
Okay. And on the bottom of the screen here, it should say share with a little up arrow.
Well, that's the problem, is it doesn't, because I've only got my...
Carrie, I think your setting doesn't allow participants to share, not unless Dr. Bates is a co-host.
Thank you. Okay, now can you see it?
Well, I've got...
So on the bottom of the screen where it says mute and start video.
Well, that's all disappeared on mine now, because I went into...
We'll make your PowerPoint not full screen.
Yeah, I tried that. Okay. Now it's gone. I'm so sorry about this.
Oh, it's okay.
Let me bring it back again. Right, I've got it back on there. Can you see that at all?
No, we can't see anything yet because you haven't started sharing your content.
Yeah, there. Let me try that. To OneDrive to share it.
And I can certainly go back to sharing mine and see if it works again, Dr. Pates.
Yeah, well, let's try that then.
Okay.
Out of this one.
How's that look?
I've got nothing at the moment. Is it mine or what?
It does seem like you're having a problem on your end because, as I understand it, the participants can see it and I can see it.
Yeah, I've never had this before.
No, we've usually been fine. But another thing you can do is you can have yours in front of you so you know what the slides say and still talk well.
Yeah, I'm going to log out and rejoin the meeting. Thank you, Veronica. That was a good suggestion. So I'll join you again in a minute.
Okay, sounds good.
I sometimes experience that in Zoom, like when my screen is blank, and that's the technique. I'm not sure if it will work for WebEx, but hopefully.
Yeah, I know, right? Teresita, I have the same issue here. It's heavy rain here as well, and my youngest said maybe we won't have school because it's, or Zoom school because it's heavy rain. That's usually not how it works in the States, but you never know. So thank you all for being patient while Dr. Pates leaves us briefly and comes back in. Okay, Dr. Pates, can you see that?
I'm back in.
Okay.
I still have nothing on the screen.
Okay, so my suggestion would be that you pull up your own PowerPoint for you.
Yeah.
And then you can do this, you can teach the screens and I can move it for everyone else.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, cool.
Right. Okay, here we go. This is the third slide. Once it became acceptable, it was a question of whether you use qualitative or quantitative methods. It was not acceptable to you.
Right.
Are you with me?
Yes.
Right. So this is talking about using mixed methods. And at one time, people were very purist and said you can't do that. You either do qualitative work or you do quantitative work. It is now much more acceptable. It's more common, especially in dissertations, because if you're researching something in a dissertation, then you may be looking quite in detail at something, and that you would want to use both those methods. You can use quantitative methods to examine the prevalence of a problem, and qualitative methods to look at the lived experience of it. And I think that's the point of qualitative. Next slide. In quantitative research, the observations will usually follow a systematic scheme whereby the classification of data is already determined when the data collection starts. So you know what you're going to do. You say that this is what the plan is for the research. You design it, and you know how you're going to collect that data. Makes it possible to gather large data sets for numerical analyses, but the understanding of the data will be restricted by the concepts on which the collection of the data was based. So you can get a lot of data from quantitative research. But once that has been set, you can't actually go beyond what you have already set. Right, we go on the next slide. In qualitative research, the observations, yours appears to have suddenly come up now. In qualitative research, the observations, behavior, etc., are usually fewer, and the researcher's preconceptions of the data or phenomena do not determine the research results to the same extent as in quantitative research. So there's much less of a fixed idea of what the outcomes are going to be. Qualitative research is often used to study social processes or the reasons behind human behavior, i.e. the why and how of social matters of society matters more than the what, where, and when of quantitative research. So it is the reasons behind human behavior, and we're asking this from the people themselves. Apologies for the spelling mistakes. Qualitative addiction research focuses on topics that range from historical processes, treatment outcomes, and drug use phenomena, and increasingly questions about alcohol and drug policy, rapid assessments of policy developments, and program implementation. And I think this is actually, it's really important because if I use the example of one of the problems we have in Britain, and I certainly know in the States as well, and I guess in many countries, are homeless people who often use drugs to cope with their being homeless. Now, the layperson will see them and see these people on the streets and they're using drugs and they will be very critical of them. But for some of these people who may have mental health problems or big other societal problems, the drugs they use will actually help them survive. But you only know that from speaking to them. Ethnographers have used qualitative methods to understand the patterns of substance use in various population groups. I'm going on to the next slide. The processes of classification, deduction, and interpretation are fundamentally similar for both qualitative and quantitative methods. Quantitative analysing methods are more clear-cut than qualitative methods, and various steps can be seen more clearly, distinguished than in a qualitative study. So the research that you're all probably trained in when you started doing your degrees was mainly quantitative research, probably, and was very clearly decided how you would do it and how the data would be collected and interpreted, etc. In qualitative work, the collection and processing of the data are much more closely intertwined, especially when the researchers personally collect the data. They will not be able especially when the researchers personally collect the data, they will not be able to avoid problems of interpretation during the collection phase. And that's one of the things that happens, that sometimes you are collecting data and you come across things that you didn't expect. You may have some of the questions you're asking or the nature of the study. They certainly wouldn't do that in quantitative research. And looking at the next slide. Another issue is that qualitative analysis is not restricted to an unambiguously demarcated data set in the same way that quantitative study is. So that means that, in fact, the data set is very unambiguous in a quantitative study, but is not so in a qualitative study. It can be a good idea for the researcher to keep detailed field diary and make notes of discussions, so they may refer back to these when analysing the data. They may also record a detail they had not taken note of earlier, and in the analysis, this must be described in an honest and convincing way. Evaluation criteria for qualitative analysis. Significance of the data set and its social or cultural place. Researchers should be prepared to argue that their data are worth analysing. It's not easy to identify criteria for significance of the data. However, the researchers should carefully define the social and cultural place and production conditions of the data. so that the researchers should, before they do it, define where and when and how we're going to gather this data. When using international comparisons, it is important to exclude demographic variations as a factor causing differences. So, for example, do not compare African farmers to American college professors. It's very easy for people to make comparisons across international boundaries and then actually confuse it because they're not using demographically similar groups of people. Evaluation criteria, again, sufficiency of data and coverage of analysis. In qualitative research, we're able to calculate in advance the extent of the data needed to estimate the parameters accurately for the purpose of the study, of the analysis. So when you're doing a quantitative study, you know how much data you need and how you're going to measure it. In qualitative work, this is different, as we have no method for that estimate and usually talk about data saturation. Data collection is terminated when no new features are revealed. And what that means is sometimes you decide to ask people questions about something, and then you may find that for the first 10, you're getting completely different answers, and then you start getting some similar answers. And by the time you meet case 20, you're actually hearing the same things that you'd heard before. And that's called data saturation, where there is nothing new that's coming through. So you can then terminate the data collection. Criteria again, sufficiency of data and coverage of the analysis. Only in few special cases can you base the analysis on a handful of observations. You will usually need to be certain that you're covering the variations of the phenomena you're studying. So you have to be careful, because it's a qualitative study, don't think you don't need to have as many people. Well, you don't need as many people usually, but don't limit it to, say, 4 or 5 when that may not cover the data that you are hoping to get. Do not collect too much data at a time, and analyze small batches of data and add as necessary. Dividing the analyses into smaller parts helps to produce more manageable results for a publishable report. So sometimes it is useful to start analysing that data as you're gathering it, and you can see where you're going, and it's actually much more manageable then, which is not what you would do with quantitative data. Sufficiency of data and coverage of analysis. Proper coverage of the analysis means that researchers do not base their interpretations on a few arbitrary cases or instances, but on a careful reading of the whole material. Qualitative reports are often loosely impressionistic because of the excessive amount of material has been made unfeasible to analyze it carefully enough. And this is a problem, that when you have too much data and you then become more of an impression rather than the real thing that you need to be measuring, because you've just got too much data there. Next slide. Transparency and repeatability of the analysis. Transparency of the analysis means that the readers are able to follow the researcher's reasoning, and that they're given the necessary information for accepting or challenging the data. 3 ways of improving the transparency and repeatability of the data, of the qualitative analysis and the report. Enumerating the data, put it down in numbers so people know what it is. Dividing the process of interpretation into steps. Make explicit the rules of decision and interpretation. So one of the things that's really important in terms of your methodology is you explain very clearly to the reader of your paper that exactly what you're doing and why you're doing it. Transparency and repeatability. Enumerate all units on which the interpretation is based. The analytic unit must be specified and as small as possible. The process of interpretation should be done step by step, and the process can be visible, so the process can be visible to the researcher and the reader, so people can see what you're doing, how you've done it, and what the process was. Give the reader an exact picture of both technical reasons and the chain of reasoning that have led to the reported results. So people need to know, what were your reasons for that you made these decisions about collecting the data, and what led to that. Practical advice, consider the format and structure of your article. Check with your chosen journal or follow a traditional style and check with other similar abstracts. So one of the problems is that if the journal that you choose to submit to isn't used to having qualitative work, you may need to check on how they want the structure to be done. But my answer is always to try to keep it in with the structure that we've already talked about during this series of webinars. Begin with the abstract. Write an abstract early in the writing process so it'll help you structure the paper. And that's one of the things I often encourage people to do if I'm doing a workshop, is say, right, I want you to think of a research project that you want to do and sit down and write an abstract. Now, you can't obviously go as far as results because you haven't done the research, but it's a very good exercise to try to write an abstract of the research you want to do, and that helps you actually clarify your thinking. Choose a title that corresponds to the content. Present the research question reshaped into the manuscript title. State the research question early and clearly. State it early and be consistent with it, and don't change it. Add to it if further findings are made. So, and one of the problems with this qualitative research is you don't always know exactly what you're going to find when you start doing the research. Conduct a thorough review of earlier research. And that's vital if you wish your work to be taken seriously. And this is often a problem in both qualitative and quantitative research, but particularly in qualitative research. If you don't review the earlier literature, your work might be seen to be in a vacuum. If you've done a good introduction, a good literature review, then people will know where you're coming from and what the nature of your paper is. Present enough information in the methods and data section. Inadequate descriptions of methods are often reasons papers are rejected. The method will be different from quantitative research, but remember, it is a way that a reader knows what you've done and can replicate it. And we go back to that whole thing about methods. It's about, I take the methods from your paper and I should be able to duplicate what you've done. So even though it's perhaps a more complicated way of doing it, they need to know how you've done it and what they can do to replicate it. Link the results to the research questions so the reader can follow the progress of the work. Give raw data, but not too much. Use illustrations. And one of the things that's very useful in qualitative research is you include quotes from the people that you've interviewed, which then illustrate the points that you've made. And it's often very useful. And you usually repeat it in their language, even if it is more vernacular language or there are swear words in it. It's often quite useful to put exactly as they have said it. But don't use too much, because if you don't need 10 quotations on the same thing. People just need to get one or two on that. In the discussion section, restate your findings, your main findings, and relate them to earlier research. Don't forget the limitations of your study and the implications of your research findings. And one of the things that is sometimes a bit more difficult is interpreting your research findings. What does this mean for the field? Sometimes it becomes very clear because of the work that you've done, but it's not always the case. Mixed methods. As I said earlier on, at one point it was very difficult to get mixed methods articles published because people said, "Oh, you must do one or the other." But when I did my doctoral research, as I said, I did research on needle fixation, which is where people are injecting compulsively and even injecting water because they like the injection so much. Now, you can measure this by asking people whether they do it, but it's very hard if you're doing just a quantitative work, to ask why they do it and what it feels like to them. And I had some fascinating responses from 20 people on the nature of why they did what they did, and it was very useful that I wouldn't have got purely from quantitative work. So, criteria for good mixed methods. Study has 2 sizable data sets. with rigorous data collection and appropriate analyses and inferences made from both parts of the study. So you are using both parts of the study to make your inferences. The article integrates both parts of the study in terms of comparing, contrasting, or embedding conclusions from both sections of the study, both strands. And the article has mixed methods components that can enrich the emerging literature on mixed methods research. So it's actually helpful to other researchers when you do that, because it can be seen the importance of doing that research. And I think that's the final slide, Carrie. So I'll come out of mine and I'm back with you.
Yes.
I'm sorry about that.
Hey, we made it work.
Yeah. Now, I also, in reading through it, realized that it's actually, some of the language is quite difficult. So you will be sent a copy of it. And if you want to come back to me and say, what does this mean or what does that mean? I'm very happy for you to do so. It's quite difficult to prepare some of these webinars to make them comprehensive and keep the language simple enough. So please do come back to me if you need to.
Well, good news. We have someone who is willing to send us their paper for our next meeting, which is Dr. Chia Francis, who's joined us today. So I just emailed you back, Dr. Francis, and said, send it along. We would be grateful.
And it is something which I hope is going to be useful, because you know what I've done with the two papers we've had so far, with Salman's and Marisol's paper, that we've gone through them, we've discussed it, and I also look at them individually and send back comments. So it's no guarantee that you'll get it published, but I hope that it increases the chances of doing so, because you're all, I know from my work that research can be quite soul destroying. You're working on your own, you're trying to do it, and it's very, very dispiriting when you get a rejection from a journal after all the hard work you've done, especially if they don't understand it.
Yep. So, questions, comments, challenges you're having in quantitative or other publishing?
Gary, may I ask a question?
Of course.
Yes, please.
Yeah, with regards to qualitative research, how do we actually, I find it challenging to determine sample size. So is it a requirement to have the data saturated? And once it's saturated, that's when you stop. Unlike in quantitative, there's a Slovin formula, but I can't see recommendation when it comes to determining the sufficient sample size for papers.
I think that's why I talked about the saturation method. The thing is, I mean, it depends very much on the subject of your research, but quite often it is about, it takes much longer to do this research because you're interviewing people in depth and you're interpreting the data and everything else. So by definition, you will probably have a smaller data set. But what you do find, if you're talking about a specific problem, is that you will start getting those very similar results, in terms of people are saying the same thing. And by that time, you can say, well, I think, there's nothing new that's been said over the last 3 people, so that my data is now, I would stop it at that point. I think the danger is that you stop it too quickly. So you must make sure that the data that you're not getting anything, but you will find, providing you have a group who are homogenous, so you know that if you're talking to, say, female drug users or young people, that they are fitting the criteria, and if you've got, then you will find fairly quickly that that there is a saturation point, and quite often by 20 cases you may have got that. But I don't think there's a formula like there is in quantitative research. Thank you for your question, Veronica.
Do we have other questions or comments? It doesn't only have to be about qualitative research. If you have other thoughts or if you're working on a paper and you need help, we have time. So.
A quiet group today.
Well, oh, did someone have a question? Because I know Dr. Pates and I were talking about the schedule, so that we do need your input on that moving forward, because we have 2 more weeks, or 2 more sessions, I should say. And we don't know how people's schedule look for December. So, if we kept going every 2 weeks, kind of what we've been doing, we would meet on the 14th and the 28th, but we didn't know if that was okay for people with holidays, or if that, if we wanted to do it into January, that's fine too. So anyone have feelings or opinions on that? Vernon, do those 2 dates work for you? Okay.
I was going to say perhaps they could think about it and let you know, Carrie. I mean, I'm happy to do whichever way people want to do it. We'll either keep to the original schedule, or we can have an earlier one so we finish it by Christmas, or we can go to January. So there's 3 options, and I'm happy to go with any of them.
Okay, so Salmon's saying that that schedule is fine.
Or maybe,
Marisol, okay.
sorry, maybe we could like meet December 14, just like scheduled, and then let's see the consensus after that. Like, well, there's no Christmas parties to begin with because of COVID. So, like,
I know.
So there's not much of a schedule. So.
That's a good idea. We could plan for the 14th and then see if anyone says differently between now and then or after. Yep. Okay.
Well, Christmas party there, Veronica.
We can have a Christmas party on here. Okay, so I'm seeing some agreement, and I'm also seeing that Salmon's going to send a revised version of his manuscript for us, so that's good. And okay, so I'm putting it's 8 a.m. here, EST, on the 14th, and I'll send out a link to that. Well, we have 22 more minutes if anyone has questions or comments that they want to make, or we can just adjourn early, but it's up to you all. We're here.
Veronica just sent a message saying she'd sent her paper for the last session.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Thank you.
Excellent. Yes.
Can I ask another question? Sorry, because like I like qualitative research because it's giving us, faces to the story. Like I know numbers are important, but for our field, like, it's giving them voices. So I kind of like it. So, and that's my bias. Okay. Yeah. But I was wondering, like, what's the, like in journal articles, what's the most common way to, the way that they analyze the data for qualitative research? Like, is it like thematic analysis, or are there even software that allows for an analysis in qualitative researches?
That's a difficult question because it does vary with the research that you're doing, and quite often you're only finding out sometimes what the research is as you go along, because it makes sense. What I can suggest is when we did the first session, there was a book called Publishing Addiction Science, which I recommended to you all, and you can get that from the ISAGE website. That's www.isage.net. And all the chapters are in there. There's a chapter on qualitative research, which will probably give you a very, you'll have it in front of you there. And it's free of charge, so you can download that free, and there's a chapter on that there. But I think it's very hard to say this is the way that you should do it, because it is very much about you know, the nature of the research as you're doing it. But remember, if there are questions you want to ask after these series of webinars are finished, I'm very happy for you to remain in touch with me. So if you have a particular question like that, Veronica, you know, keep my email address and just write to me if you need advice.
Thank you so much. That's great of you, Dr. Pates.
And that applies to everyone. It's not just Veronica.
So I think we're going to be getting a lot of revisions of the papers, so that's great. It looks like in the chat, a lot of people are going to be sending their, you know, the versions based on the feedback that's been given. So that's great. Yeah. All right. Well, if we don't have any other questions, we can say goodbye for today. And I will be sending you the link to the next session, as well as the link to this recording, should you want to look at that, and Dr. Francis's paper for everyone to look at.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all. Take care. Be well.